Live long and prosper. I'm here to talk about Star Trek, the motion picture, which was released in 1979 and was directed by Robert Wise. Okay, it reunites the cast from the original series. We've got William Shatner back, the Shat, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, Nichelle Nichols, George Takei, Walter Koenig. You get the picture. They're all back in the scene. If only they were all back. But really, they're back in body rather than spirit, because basically you've just got a load of sort of cardboard cutouts of people you recognise from Star Trek of the past, walking around in a very sort of characterless way, speaking a load of sort of science fiction mumbo-jumbo at each other, and none of what they say has any sort of relation to sort of humanity or the human condition, or is any way sort of character developing. It's all just so dull and dreary and boring, and you're just aching for some sort of charisma. You used to get that from William Shatner, Captain Kirk. You in this film, you're dying for him to sort of, getting some sort of punch up, or like, start winking at the ladies, or, just show some of the old Kirk spunk. But no, it's just so long and boring, and he doesn't do anything interesting. He just sits in his chair and looks serious. You wonder what Robert Wise was doing, really. I mean, this is a director that brought so much life and fun and energy to The Sound of Music. And if only he could have sprinkled a little bit of that on this. Obviously, we go back to the 70s. We look at the fact that science fiction was made popular again by George Lucas when he did Star Wars. And if only Star Trek, the motion picture, had a fraction of the energy and fun that Star Wars has got, then, it might pass as a half-decent film. But as it stands, Star Trek, the motion picture is a chore of a film. Yeah, so, I mean, it's just boring. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on until you just kind of it's just completely and utterly witless and charmless. You hear people talking about Star Trek, people that don't like it. And they'll say things like, oh, it's just spaceships. Oh, it's just, I don't understand it, this and the other. And to be fair, if you sat someone down for the very first time and gave them a Star Trek experience and it was this film, that all their sort of misgivings about Star Trek will be completely justified, because this film is exactly what the people that hate it think that Star Trek is. Empty. It's a big empty void of sort of special effects and production design. To be fair, the production design is very, very good, and the special effects for the time, very inventive. Clearly, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey has been a huge influence on the film. You only wish that Star Wars would have been more of an influence, really. But I think the film was a huge box office success. It did very well. You've got that sort of brand association. Star Wars was a few years earlier. You've got Star Trek. I think audiences probably went to this film thinking they'd get a very similar experience to what they got with Star Wars, because Star Trek in the 60s was fun. There was no reason to think that this might be this earnest, sort of serious sort of tone that we get. But it is. But it did well. Obviously, it did well enough at the box office to warrant a sequel, and we got The Wrath of Khan, which is an infinitely better film than this. It's a shame as well for the cast, because they just look like they've all got straitjackets on, emotional straitjackets anyway. This is terrible. And it's actually a really, really bad film in the end. I would give it, and I'm being generous here, 4 out of 10, and those 4 points are simply for the production design, the lighting, and the special effects. Nothing else deserves a point, because it's so dull. The plot is just completely and utterly baffling. You make a big budget science fiction film like this, and you would at least sort of put a coherent plot in there that people could sort of basically follow. But there's something to do with a probe called Vega that we later find out is Voyager, that's been doing all this stuff. It's got smart or whatever, but you get to it and it's like this little satellite at the end. And I'm sure it's not a spoiler. I'm sure people will be glad for a spoiler in this film, because it's that nonsensical that for someone to make actual sense of it would be a relief. So they find this probe at the end, and it's like some sort of thing that's accumulated information, and it's just like, oh, give me a Klingon. Just give me a Klingon, an angry Klingon, please, to be doing something angry with a ray gun, or a Romulan, or just some sort of space battle and some explosions and something coherent, instead of all this dreary, unending, boring nonsense that they just throw at us and expect to pass off as a film, which is really not. I think it's fair to say I didn't like Star Trek the Motion Picture. I think it's fair to say I hated Star Trek the Motion Picture. As a visual experience, yeah, fair enough. Why have dialogue? You could probably watch this film and enjoy it more knowing that there was going to be no dialogue, and it was just going to be music and production design and shots. And on that level, it might at least pass for an interesting visual experience with no plot expectations. But as it stands, it's a numbing, boring, tedious experience that I wish to never repeat again in my entire life.